So whatever is for fresh market is then pre-cooled. For example, if they are fruits, they are pre-cooled and then stored in a cold room, waiting for the buyer. And usually the buyers will be sourced prior to. So the produce then in the cold room we can use other technologies for extending shelf life. For example, in these particular centers, we've tried waxing technologies, modified atmosphere packaging. So that produce then is targeted for the fresh market. Then whatever doesn't meet requirements for the fresh market, or probably if they are fruits, they are too ripe, or they are a bit deformed, or they are injured in some way, or mechanically injured, instead of what would otherwise go to waste, then they are used to process. For example, we can make juices from these. We can dry, for example, in mangoes, we can dry them into mango chips. We can make some products like mango rolls from these kinds of products. We can make jam, so that otherwise, this product that would otherwise go to waste is actually processed into some high quality produce. Then, of course, at the same centers, processing generates waste. So one of the questions we've been asked then, so you're training these farmers to process, but then what do you do with the waste? So what we're trying to do currently is to see how do we use the waste better than just have it go to the dustbin. So currently we are trying to see how, starting with mango, how can we use the peel and the kernel from mango to substitute some the ingredients that are used in chicken feed. So that study is ongoing to supplement maize as an ingredient in chicken feed, so that then we can find better use of the byproducts of processing. And just remembering what Alex said, the fact that sometimes you have things well organized like this, but then the traders whom we're trying to reach with the some value add, produce has been already aggregated, it's sorted, it's graded, it's packaged nicely. So you'd expect the traders will pay a little bit more for this. But what the challenge you encounter in this pilot is that, when these farmers were empowered by being organized in groups and, trying to demand a little bit more for the effort, the traders are not willing to pay the extra monies for the produce. So they somehow shun these farmers. And so farmers actually feel frustrated that they've done so much, have produce of good quality, but the traders are not willing to pay the extra coin for the value add. So that is a challenge you've experienced. But then, of course, what you're trying to push is try to get many more farmers organized in groups, so that the culture of traders directly reaching out to farmers and exploiting them because the farmers have no storage facilities, they can't process, can't do anything. Then we can break that culture, so that indeed farmers can actually get value for their produce. I think that is one of the challenges we experienced, and we are hoping that we can sort this out by encouraging more more farmers in groups. But I forgot to mention something else, that what to do, especially in these aggregation centers. Like I said, reducing losses or preserving quality is not just technology, but it's also the practices, how produce is handled. So what we use also in these centers, where farmers are well organized in groups, it's easier for us to then train them on good practices and continue building their capacity and good practices for handling to reduce losses. And of course, we use this to demonstrate these technologies, the applicable technologies. So farmers, not only the ones in the groups, but those who are interested can actually come, and we organize trainings for them. We come and see technologies in action, so that they are able then to demand. For example, we get people asking us to build for them a dryer, build for them a charcoal cooler or something like that. So this is proof. It's not yet, I can't say it is foolproof, successful, but it's a way that we're seeing that, one, we help farmers to better aggregate their produce and address some of these logistical challenges in agricultural value chains, but also as a way of demonstrating applicable technologies and create awareness about these technologies. I think I've exhausted my 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jane. That was great. Touching on the coordination issues, the farmer groups, the technologies as well. And I know there's a lot of activity on the Jamboard around that. I'm going to ask you to come back and follow up on one thing after we've heard from Brett and Ashu. So let me turn to Brett now, please, for a few minutes discussion, Brett, of some of the activities you're engaged in.
Mute. All right, unmuted. Thanks, Alex, and it's nice to see many familiar faces on the screen, as well as some new ones as well. You're talking about scaling of post-harvest loss work. The work that I did when I was at the World Food Program, over the course of 4 years, we reached about 750,000 families in 16 countries. With some pretty simple training on hermetic storage and safe drying. And in that, dropped post-harvest losses reliably from somewhere between 30 to 40%. We found the losses were much greater than any of the official estimates. And that was pre-farm gate, down to less than 2% with some relatively simple technologies and effective training in the local languages. But let me talk about another language. Before coming to Uganda, I was the country director for the World Food Program in China. Mandarin is the language in my house. And there's a phrase, or it's not just a phrase, but in the Chinese language, threat and problem uses the same character as opportunity. And so I want to say that this opportunity or this problem is actually us. Let me be a little bit controversial, myself included. And I actually think one of the biggest challenges right now is the inability of practitioners to convince government policymakers and development donors to what extent reducing post-harvest losses and aflatoxin is not if not the game changer that needs to happen. The vast majority of agricultural research and funding goes to increasing yield. Some say it's over 90% of the ag funding over the past 25 years goes into this, instead of investing into what's already been proven to be one of the most impactful interventions or changes. Now, this isn't due to lack of data or research. When asked about why or what's the root cause of this challenge or this problem, it might be that many of the large agrochemical and seed companies can't make money on reducing post-harvest losses. So the powers that be economically don't have a lot to gain by fixing this problem, which quite frankly affects more people or has a greater negative impact than conflict, HIV, and malaria combined across Africa. The best research that I've found on this, and actually some of the groundbreaking, is from ETH Zurich, gentlemen Matthias Brandl and Michael Huss. Mainly focused on East Africa. They found, this was last year, a 38% reduction in food insecure households after one harvest just by adopting hermetic storage, and that was in Tanzania. Then, more in the context of kind of climate change or threats, if you look at it within the context of COVID, with a project in Kakamega in Western Kenya that ran across 2019 and continues to the present, their initial findings released in January 2021, they found that villages using hermetic storage were half as likely to become food insecure. So you've got both 38% reduction of food insecure households in Tanzania, so taking people out of food insecurity, as well as preventing people from sliding back into it. I mean, there's tons of research. MIT's Comprehensive Initiative on Technology Evaluation back in 2016, they looked at some work that was being done here. They did an independent assessment for USAID on the work that the World Food Program was doing. And they found statistically significant improvement for food availability, for family income, for household health and nutrition, mainly with the reduction of aflatoxins, daughters and sons schooling, because the kids didn't have to go out and actually look for food. And then the biggest impact possibly was on women's workload and women's socioeconomic status. So, I mean, just absolutely huge amount of data, solid peer-reviewed random control trials. This goes back decades, back to 1982, when the Swiss-funded post-cosecha project began in Latin America. So none of this seems to be getting out to these decision makers, which is, to me, I think, one of the real big challenges. So at present, my work, I ran the World Food Program Post-Harvest Center for 4 years. And then they had asked me to move on to another post. And fortunately, my wife agreed with me that Uganda was a great place to be, and that the opportunity here to make a difference was just too big. And so I left the fancy secure UN job and started a company here, Harvest Agricultural Solutions. And that right now, I think one of the most interesting and promising opportunities that we're seeing right now is that, again, this opportunity versus problem or threat thing comes up again, is earlier this year, the Kenyans, with good reason, Jane, I think you'll be happy to hear me say that, put a ban on the import of Ugandan grain. This has become a catalyst for action by both the Grain Council of Uganda as well as different ministries here as well as in Kenya. There's some people who say that this is political, but the reality is that they looked at the post-harvest losses being 30–40%, and then even of the grain that remained, you had 45% of the grain here that was toxic due to aflatoxins in Uganda. And it's a growing threat, it's a growing problem. And interestingly enough, what we found when we were doing the post-harvest work at WFP was that if you address the post-harvest issues in terms of safe drying and safe storage, you pretty much eliminated the aflatoxins pretty much completely. And again, relatively simple interventions address two of these biggest challenges, the aflatoxins and the post-harvest side. So again, this opportunity threat piece, that ban earlier this year on Ugandan grain has led to what is now a 5-year, $26 million project that has the Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Agriculture, and the Ministry of Health behind it. And it really focuses on prevention at source. There's been some, I would say, interesting new technology, hopeful, promising, of using things like ozone to chemically break the bond between the aflatoxin and the grain. And that's great, but something like that in a market like Uganda or Kenya, what that will lead to is effectively a two-tier system where not everybody has the basic human right to safe food. And so we're actually seeing real promising progress towards fixing the problem at source, fixing the post-harvest problems at source. Right now in the proposal is to reach literally half of the 5 million smallholder families that are in Uganda over the next 5 years. And again, that prevention at source instead of here later in the value chain, we think is really, really exciting. So in summary, for me, I think that, well, we need everybody's help on this call because one of the biggest challenges is really awareness, not so much in the farming community. We'll get onto that when we talk about the biggest barriers, but just awareness among the donors and in governments that real answers are already there that can be implemented successfully with real measurable results that make a huge life-saving difference or a generational difference for the families across, well, sub-Saharan Africa is where my focus is, but is the same thing goes in India as well as in Southeast Asia. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Brett, and thank you for putting the focus on the policy level, as well as the farmer and the rest of the chain. And now for another part of the world, I want to turn it over to Ashu to talk a little bit about what Digital Green's approach is on this. Ashu.
Great. Thanks, Alex, and thanks everyone for the comments beforehand. I'll cover kind of 3 themes that I think are all important. One is education and awareness. The second is logistics and coordination in terms of getting to market. And the third is incentives. And I think all of those things are pretty critical. So on the education and awareness side, for those who don't know Digital Green, our model is really to build capacity in the government extension systems in the countries where we operate, which are largely India and Ethiopia, but also a few other places in South Asia and Africa. And the primary way we do that is we enable those government extension systems to sort of put in place a community video-enabled extension model. So demonstrating certain practices, both on the production side, but also post-production on better practices. And we found that, to the point about a lot of this stuff being fairly simple in terms of technology, videos demonstrating the utility of PICS bags can go a long way. And videos demonstrating proper, storage can go a long way. The other thing that we've seen recently that's really important to this is like quality can drive, especially for certain commodities, improvements in price, and communicating what those benefits are as you improve quality to farmers can drive behavior change. So an example, we've been doing some work with chili in the state of Andhra Pradesh, which is a huge grower of chili. When traders look at how they're going to price chili, even a few grade change from kind of D to A drives a pretty big change in price on the order of 5 to 10 rupees per unit. And some of the stuff is things you have to address while you're producing, like capsaicin content and what kind of seed you use. A lot of it is what you do post-harvest, right? So moisture residue, broken pods is a huge driver of dings and reduction in quality. And those are things that are obviously very much in the control of the farmers. So what we've been doing is we've been working with farmers on building connections with testing facilities that give them reports on where their chili is graded, and then to say, okay, you got dinged because of poor post-harvest storage practices, and here's what you can do to fix that. And tailoring that message to that farmer in that moment can be really impactful because there's sort of a tangible, oh, like I could have gotten 5 more rupees per kilogram if I had done XYZ, right? So that education and awareness, but doing it in a very timely way, I think is quite critical. On the logistics and coordination side, we, for a few years in Bihar, but also in Karnataka, ran a program called Loop, where we were focused on horticulture, fruits and vegetables primarily, and farmers could basically request pickups to take their produce to market the next day. And it was a shared transport service. So think of it as like Uber Pool. Farmers found it really useful because they didn't have to go to the mandi themselves. Someone else could go with them, and the cost was lower because we were pooling the cost of that transport. The other thing that came from that, and we didn't unfortunately study this in a very rigorous way, we have some anecdotal stuff, but because we were providing the transport, there was less, we were packing the right crates and putting stuff, in the right sort of, it wasn't like a, one-off two-wheeler that someone was taking from their own farm, but kind of a slightly bigger sort of transport vehicle. And so less losses in transit. We unfortunately were unable to continue running Loop. We didn't have an economic model for it that made sense. And unlike some of the, what I'll label as like predatory food delivery apps that can burn like billions of dollars of VC money, like we don't have the luxury to do that for value add services like this. So not operational right now, but that idea of like outsourcing, the transport layer and having it be done by someone who's a specialist can obviously, have a lot of value. The last thing I'll talk about is incentives. When we were running Loop, one of the things that we learned a lot about when we were talking to transporters is like, and I think, Jane made this point about, farmers not seeing the value, like loss is just priced in to every step of the chain, right? So every actor who is picking up along the chain knows that they're going to lose whatever it is, 10%. And so they just bake that into their margin. So there's no incentive for anyone to really reduce the losses, right? And so to me, maybe part of the answer is, can you collapse the value chain so that someone who does do something smart in terms of reducing loss can internalize that as margin, right? Instead of having it just, kind of exit the system. There's, to the point that Jane also made about kind of farmer collectives, there's a big push in India around farmer producer organizations. We think that has a lot of potential. There's a lot of capital that's available in investing in post-harvest infrastructure. And so for farmers who can collectivize, who can aggregate what they're doing and make investments, and obviously this varies commodity by commodity, in things like pulping or drying or preserving the stuff so it has a longer shelf life, especially for those fruit and vegetable commodities, we think that can go a long way. And that has the twin benefit of like kind of breaking this cycle we're trapped in now, where the status quo just kind of continues because everyone knows that they can earn their margin despite the loss. But if someone could intervene, take a step of the value chain they're not presently doing and capture that loss, the avoidance of losses, increased margin, then maybe that creates an incentive for real behavior change. So those are some examples from our side.
Thank you very much, Ashu, and thank you for keeping time. That was amazing. We have 5 minutes left, I think, and there's been a lot of activity in the Jam boards. I can see that. But unless someone else shouts out a question or raises a hand, I would just ask each of you to take 1 minute to suggest a successful approach or an important consideration that other development organizations might keep in mind if they're trying to integrate post-harvest management or post-harvest loss into their work. What's a lesson that, or a priority that comes out of your work that you'd like others to bear in mind? And I'm just going to start with you, Ashu, since you were last.
I mean, I think you've got to make the benefit tangible to the farmer, right? Like I remember there's a study that Penn did. It was a pretty exhaustive report about like markets in India, and they did some analysis about how, and I think Jane mentioned this as well, like farmers doing grading and sorting in a lot of the places they studied didn't actually earn any more from it. So it's like, why do it, right? It's extra labor and I'm not getting anything from it. So I think in cases where post-harvest loss does have a real tangible benefit, like just figuring out how to like make that pop to the farmer, and some of that is things we think about in our extension messaging, like that's critical.
Excellent, and that is generalizable. But Brett, do you have any quick message for practitioners listening in?
Yeah, I agree with Ashu. Financial literacy was a huge piece for us in terms of the training that we did. As soon as people realize it, people would say, if I buy a PP, a polypropylene bag to store my grain, versus this PIX bag or Grain Pro, this costs 4 times more. So they were just making that comparison. And you've got people who, for literally a millennia, generation upon generation, have never been able to invest. They're just trying to get to the next harvest. They're trying to save energy. As you said, if there's no benefit that's measurable to an individual, they're not going to change their behavior. And what we were able to do was, and I think one of the pieces that was a success of what we did at WFP was, and we took it from the private sector, from Grain Pro. They would do bag opening ceremonies where you had real visual evidence of, well, here's the destroyed grain and here's the other stuff. I mean, the longest that this has been stored ever is actually Grain Pro in Rwanda, which was 12 years. And you can easily find the video for that in, I'm not suggesting farmers should hang on for 12 years, but making that financial literacy case and showing how much better they would do. And we also, I think another piece that was important for us that was controversial within my colleagues at the time at the World Food Program, we didn't start with the poorest farmers, which is what WFP would usually do. We started with the people who might be early adapters, who were aspirational consumers, who we treated them like consumers and participants as opposed to beneficiaries. And I think that made a huge difference. And in that, when people saw what was happening, you can measure, it was a doubling or tripling of incomes within one harvest, all right? And most of the times with the bags, you could show, depending on the crop, but the bags, they had the return within a harvest. With the plastic silo, within 2 to 3 harvests, they actually had their money back. They've never been in a mentality of investing for the future. And so putting that financial literacy piece in and treating people like a willing participant as opposed to a beneficiary that you give something to, I think those were kind of key to the successes that we did have.
Thank you very much, Brett. And Jane, with 2 minutes left, would you please give us one consideration for others to make a priority? And if you would say a little bit about the 3rd All Africa Post-Harvest Congress and Exhibition for those interested, I'd be very grateful.
Yeah, so I think I'll just add to what Ashu and Brett have said, that, you have to make a value proposition to the users of these technologies. I know the reason that the aggregation for us didn't work, or it didn't show the benefits, because the traders were not willing to do that. So how we've been wondering, how do we then bring the traders on board and show them the value of what, because usually, for example, mango or fruit traders, they have to spend time in the field collecting small amounts from farmers who are scattered all over. Now you have done that logistics for them, and so naturally it should be worth their investment. But so the question is, how do we bring the traders on board? And like I said in my chat, that this model of village aggregation centers is not just for horticulture, but it also works for grains. I've seen village aggregation centers for grains, because storage remains the key challenge. If it's cold chain for perishables and dry chain for the non-perishables. So I still bet on village aggregation centers. Now about the post-harvest congress, this is scheduled for September 13 to 16. It's gonna be virtual. I've posted the website in the church. So now the papers, we are done with that, but you can exhibit, you can hold a side event within the Congress. You can follow me and for more information about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to reiterate that in our observations in 5 seconds, aggregators matter a lot. Thanks very much, everybody. And we'll get back to the main group, I believe. Oh, it says we got 55 seconds. Aggregators seem to be where a lot of information is lost. And it might be that working with them and understanding the benefits and connecting is a critical thing. The other thing I want to mention is because There was a recent report written on inclusive agricultural and rural development by David Bathrick and some associates of his, mostly USAID, former USAID folks, that touches on many of these things. And many of you might be interested in reading that report as well. And with that, I think, Nathan, are we supposed to leave the breakout room?
Yeah, I think so. And it'll close automatically in 20 seconds, but maybe once we get back to the main session, you could post a link to that report. Feel free to share other information in the reports or the Jamboard too. I think you can continue accessing that long after this is over. Thanks, everybody.